All right, so the purpose of part 2 of this presentation is to understand a holistic brain, mind, body, spirit in society framework of the self, and to describe models of feminism that respect and embrace the body without claiming that biology is destiny. I just want to acknowledge the Stanford philosophy text as inspiration for a lot of this material. So modern feminism, as I've outlined it, has an aim, and the aim in third wave or modern feminism or identity micropolitics is to rethink the body and to separate sex and gender for the purpose of countering the notion that social rules, capacities, potentialities of the female is determined by her biology. Through this rethinking, then, we liberate the body from the patriarchal system. This liberation, achieved through this rethinking, will deconstruct patriarchy. Part of the aim is also to reconstruct social categories that are outside of the patriarchal system. And we reconstruct social categories by changing our thought, our language, and our social action. And there's a vigorous understanding that complete reconstruction of our social form also requires political forces and policies that uphold oppression must be dismantled. There's an understanding of economic and legal regulations that need to be reformed. And there is an emphasis on daily use of language. That's why we call it micropolitics. Daily use of language creates thinking and social forms that have to be critically evaluated in routine daily practice. So a question that remains is there an experiential reality? Social construction specifically, but also postmodernism and a little bit more, and post-structuralism to some extent, suggest that there is no such thing as reality with a capital R. There's only individual experience realities. So there can be no sort of consensual reality. But some philosophers believe that reality is not only cognitive or linguistic or based on social performance, and that there is a physical truth that is experienced. So launching off from that, we can imagine that there are physical characteristics of humans. Sex is one, skin color might be another, that are physical facts. They exist outside of cognition, and possessing these has experientially real consequences for those people. So that oppression and violation based on perceived race or perceived gender can be counted and are experienced as real across people, across places, across circumstances like socioeconomic status. So they're not equivalent, but they are real. So while we understand, for example, that race is not a biological fact, skin pigmentation is a biological reality. So while we understand race is not socially constructed, that does not remove the lived reality of discrimination, prejudice, violence, or hate. And sex, knowing that sex does not determine one's activities or roles, essential attributes, capacities, personality, understanding that the assignment of gender to biological sex is socially constructed does not eliminate the lived reality that gender-based violence occurs and is evidenced by misuse of females, violation, rape, murder, enslavement. Sorry about that. Question two is, and this is sort of the biggest question, is what is a woman? So, using social construction theory and post-structuralism, Butler in the 90s proposed the concept of gendered performance. So this is where the sort of there is no such thing as a woman arises. In Butler's theory, she said that gendered performances are performances in which gendered ideals are acted out in accordance to social scripts and social ideals. So the way that a woman is supposed to be is scripted by society, and those are acted out by people. So she says that cognition and language and performance all overlap with biological sex, and that this makes us believe that biological sex, that is being female, plus these social scripts and ideals such as femininity, equal a woman. So when you deconstruct that, you have to say, well, wait a minute, biological sex is not the same as a social script, and the social scripts and biological sex do not make a woman. So of course they devolve into social scripts and ideals are not women. And what that leaves is biological sex, female, sort of left off the equation. So de Beauvoir in The Second Sex in the 50s, which was, of course, way ahead of her time, she explores the intertwining of the material body and the cultural self, and formulates a theory of embodied selves. So a couple quotes from her. De Beauvoir said, to be present in the world implies strictly that there exists a body which is at once a material thing in the world and also a point of view toward the world. She also says it is only through experience, or what I would call lived experience, that facts are manifest. A mind without a body is inconceivable. So the problem is the flight from the material. So there are plenty of feminist philosophers looking at this problem. So in Butler's account, the criticism of Butler's account by these philosophers is that this theory fails to accommodate the weightiness of the body, or what I would call the body's material reality, the form through which all is experienced. It doesn't account for the impact of having a body on our cognition or our perception, and it relegates the body to some sort of neutral plastic matter, which is acted upon or shaped by society. So this flight from reality has disallowed attention to lived material bodies. Lived material bodies are involved in active processes of becoming, which far exceed the way that culture forms it. And another, Alemo and Heckman say that the lived material bodies interact and enable social, cultural, and historic forces to work with and transform its existence. So embodiment, the two things I want to tell you about in terms of embodiment is embodiment philosophies and then some embodiment theories in psychology. Embodiment philosophies, there are a few. Here's two I want to tell you about. One is this, the concept of entanglement. And in philosophy, they're talking about the entanglement of matter and meaning. That matter, or the material self, And the meaning making of the human, that is the cultural and the cognitive and the perceptive capacity, are entangled. So Barad says language has been granted too much power, and goes on to say that subjective experiences of embodiment have a role in constituting a sense of self. Subjective experiences of embodiment are a real thing, and they are part of the self-making of a human. Another philosophy is this idea of embodiment as a mode of being in the world. So the being in the world philosophy is a old phenomenology philosophy, sort of a German philosophy, and there's also a French one. And Jung purports this philosophy, and she says experiences of bodies occur in situations in which it is impossible to disentangle the so-called natural or physical or material and social elements. She also writes about intentional engagement in the world, that the body is the framework or stuff through which we engage with the world. And this engagement is influenced by our shape and the contours of our shape, and of course our social context and internalized cultural rules, but also bodily habits that are developed so that all of these are kind of a package. And for interesting reading, please see Jung 2005, Throwing Like a Girl, and she's got other essays including Pregnant Embodiment, Breasted Embodiment, and Menstrual Meditations. There's also a vigorous branch of psychology called embodiment psychology, and there's actually about 30 different lines of this psychological field. Some are in linguistics, some are in cognition, some are in neural processing, brain structures, that kind of thing. The one I want to tell you about here is two of them. Well, first of all, Freud was very interested in the body and has always maintained in his early writings in the 20s that the body has material contours that make up the self. So Freud says that it's impossible to experience the body independently of social formation, but this corporeal or physical surface is how we experience ourselves and others. So it's the sort of the material foundation upon which all social experience occurs. And the other big line is this brain and cognition set of theories, and that their reasoning is that the brain structure and cognition, thought patterns, are influenced by our bodies. So, and these thought patterns, the thought and the brain and the thought patterns, are influenced through interaction between the body and the environment. That's what makes thought happen. Also, that all thought pathways are built on earlier structures. So from the infant's first waking moment, structures are already being built, and every subsequent structure is built on earlier structures. So when we say girlhood matters, infanthood also matters. So one last quote then: by using the term embodied, we mean to highlight 2 points. First, that cognition depends on the kinds of experiences that come from having a body, including sensory motor capacity. And second, that these capacities themselves are embedded in biological, psychological, and cultural context.